Hello and welcome to the September edition of Mytech U, a monthly educational series for technology and business topics. My name is Nathan Austin and I will be your moderator today. This month, we will be holding a panel discussion on the topic of 5 steps to drive adoption with your team. I'm really excited and we're very fortunate to have 3 panelists with us today who will share their individual stories and experience on today's topic. But before we turn it over to the panel, a couple of housekeeping notes for the audience. One, thank you very much for joining us today or for listening in the future. This presentation is being recorded and will be available within 24 hours after the presentation. The audience is on mute. However, if you have a question, please use the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to interject your question into the conversation, or we will follow up with you afterwards. All right, with that said, and to our esteemed panel, please introduce yourself, and that will kick off the discussion. Jan, let's start with you.
Okay, perfect. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Jan Lehman. I'm based in the Twin Cities. I am the founder and CEO of CTC Productivity. Coming out of school, I went to work for Accenture, which is one of the world's largest management consulting companies. So we were focused on streamlining the business operations for Fortune 100 level type businesses. From there, I went to work for Kraft Foods. I had a wonderful career. I was very fortunate. My last assignment, I was an expatriate with them living in Stockholm, Sweden. I had a staff of about 60 employees, and together we were responsible for streamlining business processes for Kraft Foods International in that region, anywhere from marketing to distribution. So great training for me as I embarked on my journey of starting my own business. Now I'm focused on small to medium-sized businesses or departments within larger companies. Our overall focus is to eliminate waste and maximize resources, so people, technology, and time. I often call myself a process geek or an IT translator. At the end of the day, I do one-on-one coaching, speaking, a lot of project work that's focused on process improvement and organizational development. And I have a fabulous team. So thanks, Nate. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. How about you, John?
Sure, yeah. I began Webolutions 24 years ago next month at the advent of the internet, so we were pretty early in there. And so as we've worked with hundreds of visionary businesses along with implementing marketing solutions, now we actively help create stronger companies with programs to build a solid vision and drive employee engagement to help companies really generate more dynamic growth.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
How about you, Jenny?
Thanks, Nate. Thanks for having me on the panel today. Let's see. I started, gosh, I don't even want to date myself, but I started by managing really large teams in the training, marketing, and sales industry and programs that were basically in the tech sector. So I've managed large international teams for Packard Bell and NEC, Lexmark, Samsung. So that really kind of got me in the tech space. And then about 13 years ago, I started Mission Critical Training, and we're basically a company that's located in Arizona and Colorado, and we focus on training businesses and technology and professional development courses across the country.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And for everyone listening, before we're going to ask a question about why to start this off, but I want to frame kind of the genesis of putting this this panel together with the experience they have. They were very specifically kind of targeted as far as their expertise between Jan, John, and Jenny, the J panelists, as we've come to learn that we started. But it really came out of, as we've been doing a lot of engagement with our clients and prospects this year around helping them identify ways where they can solve communication and collaboration problems. But then, and the question keeps coming up from our audience and from our clients and attendees of these sessions: how can I drive this stuff in my team? Like, they get excited about the ideas, excited about the opportunity, and then they're struggling with, well, how do I take the next step? So this session is really targeted for you as far as how can you take, if you're trying to learn something new and apply it back into your organization or use it to help your team. These are some tips from the experts. So I'm hoping that that's something that you can put that in context and take some nuggets back to your organization. So, all right, I want to put that in context. So the starting question, and Jan, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to go in the same order here, Jan, John, and then Jenny. But why is driving adoption with your team a critical skill for every organization? Can you start us off?
Yeah, for me, I think plain and simple, it's your way to stay competitive and stay ahead of your, the competition, whether it be, identifying, resolving issues or spotting big opportunities and bringing that change within your organization. A good example right now, what we're seeing with a lot of our business clients is the business environment is significantly changing, and companies are really unaware of that and not taking advantage of it. And so their organizational structures, the technology, the communication is not evolving. Over the last 10 plus years, there's been a shift from individuals from being an individual contributor to working in teams. I think 90% of the business population works in a team environment. And so companies like Microsoft and Google, technology companies, have spotted this. They've provided tools, but what we're seeing is many companies aren't even taking advantage of that and, again, leveraging it within their companies. So it's just one example of where companies need to start being aware of the shift in the environment so they can stay competitive.
Awesome. Yeah, John, what about you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think this is critical to every business today. If you can't adopt new approaches, systems, tools, there's really no forward organizational process. Kind of one of the measures, I think this has changed fundamentally, one of the measures of a successful organization today is the rate at which the organization can shift, evolve, and adopt new technologies. This rate within your organization, I think, is really directly tied to how well your culture is set up and aligned with everybody on your team.
Excellent. Yeah. And Jenny, with your background, what do you see as far as why this is a critical skill to have in an organization?
Yeah, the problem is human beings hate change. It's against our very fiber. It's just our human nature. We don't want change. So the biggest hurdle in getting user adoption is getting the users to actually embrace and welcome any change that's going to come down. And obviously you need it to stay competitive, just as Jan and John said. And if you want a return on your investment when you're going to bring in technology or a new system, just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. And they'll be very resistant to it, unfortunately, as we know. And so if you don't get them prepared for that change and get them to embrace it and love it, it's going to greatly hurt employee morale, which directly correlates to productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I love just the similarities, but yet the differences in the ways you all responded to that question. So, all right, so that's kind of the why. That's why we're having this conversation today. Now, the rest of some of the questions that we have prepared, and again, the audience that's here, by all means, please throw any questions out to the audience as well, to the panelists as well. But I'm going to start with, we kind of put together a high level, again, 5 steps that we kept it loose because we wanted to allow the panelists to have kind of their own interpretation and ways they're going to bring this to the table. So I'm going to start with Jan in particular, because Jan is a productivity consultant. First and foremost, driving adoption means driving change, as Jenny just mentioned. So how do you go about, when you engage your clients, or in your experience, how do you go about identifying opportunities that can help an organization move forward?
It's such a good question. So, first it starts with understanding what's the end game. So the senior leader that's brought us in, is the goal to double the revenue, or in many cases anymore, we're being brought in just to reduce the stress level within companies. But understanding the end game, then we can go to work identifying the obstacles and issues that are preventing them from getting there. It's interesting to me how often a senior leader doesn't really know what the root cause is that's causing their problems. So we dive in a lot with asking a lot of questions. Typically when we're diving into the questions, we have 2 objectives. One is figuring out the problems that are actually getting in the way, and then the other is actually trying to identify resources that are available to them for them to leverage, whether it be technology or people to delegate to and those sort of things. So the asking questions tends to be a lot of one-on-one coaching. We do 360-degree evaluations with teams to see what's going on. We find out through those conversations it might be communication issues, training issues. One time I found out everybody hated their boss, and that was the actual productivity problem, which was interesting. But it's really getting to the root cause of the problem that's really important. A good example of this is we often get brought in and management will say email is our issue. And we dive in and we find out it's really not email. The tool is fine. The person knows how to manage email, but it might be that they're not really leveraging their organization fully. They're not delegating work and assigning responsibility. And so they're kind of a cog in the wheel with the communication pipeline, and everything's coming through them, things like that. So we really get in there and figure out what the actual issues are, and that identifies what needs to change.
Awesome, that's great. So, and by all means, John and Jenny, if you have other tips, again, I'm hoping that as you go through each one of these questions, if there's a tip or something you found successful as we go through this, that by all means, I don't want to prevent you from jumping in and saying something. So that's good. So we started with, and I loved one of the things you mentioned is really, I think this is one of the key things that is often eludes groups of people working together, or even executives, as you mentioned, is what is the real problem we're trying to solve, right? It's really trying to identify what are we really trying to solve here, and what's the end game, as you mentioned. So once you've identified things, John, in your role as a CEO, and as someone who's yourself probably tried to drive change, but I also wonder, as you have teams of people on, people on your team at Webolutions that are trying to drive change, whether that be at one of your clients or internally, what are you looking for your team with regard to involving the appropriate personnel, and why is it so critical in being able to take the next step here?
You bet. So, today, I think all successful organizations live in a state of constant change. If not, I think you cease to exist. It's just a fact. If you're not always changing, you're not going to be around because your competitors are. So, it might just be a change in a process. United just sent out an email about their new boarding process, and so that's a smaller change. Or it might be a fundamental change, to the company and how they position themselves out there in the marketplace. Amazon has gone from we sell books online to we dominate the market in everything. And so each one of those shifts in their positioning is a fundamental change. And I guess I kind of take a broad look at this, where all effective change, I think, is driven by a clear company vision, roles, values, responsibilities, and the related expectations. So kind of, what was said before is the end game. But if everybody in the organization isn't aligned and doesn't know where they're going, or they hate their boss, or the organization isn't set up correctly, change is always going to be a problem. So, you want to make sure everybody's aligned and looking forward to the same destination, and that they understand their specific roles in getting everybody there. And I thought this question was a little bit, hey, who do you involve? And I think all change has to involve everybody, because they have to know where that bus is going. Where are we trying to get to together? What's everybody's role in getting there? And do we all share the same values, and are we all on board before you can do that effectively? So as well, before change is initiated, you want to look at prioritizing initiatives based on the best use of resources for the expected benefit. Everybody then understands and can get it done. This allows you to move at a faster pace than an organization where people are trying to change things and nobody understands why. So I think the biggest thing that I would say is, I don't know if you just have one person doing change. I think you have the entire organization understanding where everybody's going and what everyone's roles and responsibilities are, and you get rid of all that resistance that can come up if you're not aligned.
Hey, Nate, this is Jan. Can I interject on that? That was awesome. And I guess to add to that, if you look at the change model, what you learn from it is the importance of getting everybody involved at the very beginning of change, and making sure everybody has a voice. And even if the end result is not what they wanted, they at least feel they've been heard. So I think you're right. It's really involving the entire organization that will be impacted by the change, even if they're not driving the change.
Yeah, and this is Jenny. Just to add to that, obviously, if you don't get everybody on board, it's not going to happen. But I know there's companies with all different sizes, and sometimes, they say, well, we can't have everybody, be part of the development and putting this in. But you still need to, have some steps in place to make sure that everybody's coming along with you. So especially if you're doing something like a software or a system adoption, they're usually most successful when you can leverage what we call, peer influence in your company. And we actually use that acronym to help remember the best way to drive change. So if we take the P out of peer, you know, it's you have to prepare everybody. You need to find key employees to get them involved in the development and planning of the new implementation if you have a really large company. So you can't pick everyone to start, but you want to pick people who are already leaders in the organization, not necessarily management, but employees who others look up to, or anyone who is maybe a high-powered user, meaning that they really get technology and they're sure to truly engage in testing and understanding of how systems can work best. And also you want to get people involved in this initial group who might be naysayers for change. Because if you get all these people on board and you get them involved in the very beginning on, you know, how do we want to change, how do we want to implement it, what are things we need to worry about, and you kind of make them your panelists, including your naysayers, they all embrace it, and then they become cheerleaders for the rest of the company. And then the other three acronyms, so the E is for enlighten. You want to conduct many preview sessions for the whole company once you have gotten your panelists defining what this change is going to be, so that you have times to highlight what the new benefits are, or the new features of the system or the software. That helps generate excitement for the whole company. And then as soon as you just go to roll it out, you want to engage everyone. So make sure that you have constant training to keep, you know, them abreast of everything that's going to happen so they're ready going in. And then last is reinforcement. So you have to make sure that once it is live, everyone's been trained. You have two types of reinforcement. One is ongoing training support, or people that need help. And then the next is a plan from management, where this is really need the top down to reinforce that use of whatever the new system or procedures or software is, to make sure that, you know, you're forcing people to use them daily. Because if you don't, if it's not something they have to embrace right away, they'll avoid it, and then that'll lead to poor adoption in the long run.
Yeah. Wow. All three. You know, I expected something along those lines, but there's so much you all shared that I wasn't really expecting as far as how you approached it, and I love it. And the fact that, you know, I think sometimes people don't get. I think where I thought it might go is about how I think sometimes people are trying to drive change and they don't get, you know, the right person, the right leadership people involved. But I love how you all said, like, look, you got to start with the top. You got to start with then soliciting and eliciting feedback from everyone that's going to be affected by it. All three of you very similar answers. I love that. That was kind of the takeaway. That's excellent. So that's great. So as far as getting the right people involved, and I love the approaches and some of the nuggets of information that was shared. So Jenny, I want to go and start with you on this next one. Mm-hmm. So kind of as we walk through the stages here, we've identified the problem we want to solve. We've gotten the people that we need to be involved, and we've listed it. But and Jan already alluded to this earlier, that, you know, every organization kind of has finite resources. So how do you, like, time, money, tools, what's available to them? So do you have any recommendations for organizations to help them assess, you know, what existing capabilities they have, or what resources would make sense to put towards solving the problem?
Yeah.
How have you gone about that in your experience?
Sure, absolutely. And Jan also had already talked about kind of doing assessments, and those are huge, because if you want to just train everybody blanket on everything, you can, but that gets very expensive and very time consuming to help with adoption. So doing simple assessments, things for maybe skill gaps or needs assessments, and they can be as simple as a survey where you have people just turn that in, you can see where you've got the gaps, or it could be discussion groups or one-on-one interviews. So there's a lot of different tools based on the time and the resources that you can leverage. And then also resources to help that problem in the long run, you know, is to reduce that training budget, which you'll need when you have change for users, is have some ongoing supporting tools, because training can be expensive, and once you have better targeted and pinpoint those training needs with assessments, that's going to help reduce the budget. But then afterwards, you know, making sure that you have that retention, and you don't need constant ongoing training afterwards or real formal training sessions. You need to have some support tools that will be less expensive. So they can be things like hard copy training manuals that people can go back and reference after a class, or quick tip sheets on how to do the quick things in the system, or there might be video snippets and very short bite-sized things that people can reference, or there might be follow-up workshops where people can, you know, bring their own work product as it relates to whatever the new thing that you're trying to get them to adopt, and they can have hands-on help. So those are things that can be less expensive that you can do following the more expensive formal training to help keep that retention high and help people adopt and change better.
Awesome. Any extra comments on that with from Jan or John as far as kind of assessing some of those components?
So I guess I took this question a little bit differently, you know, and I think the entire organization has to drive change. So what we do is we have as one of the expectations that all of our team members are responsible for initiating change. You know, as the business CEO, I don't get to see everything that I think that we need to change. So each person basically on a regular basis will create a venture, and they'll say, hey, here's a problem that I see. Here's some ways that we might address this. Here's what the resources are going to cost. You know, we're going to need this amount of money, or we're going to need this amount of people, or we're going to need this amount of time to address this issue. And here's all the different scenarios. Here's what I think we're going to get back from doing it. What are the alternatives? You know, one alternative is don't do anything, and what is the cost? And then we sit down and we weigh all of the different ventures against our resources. And if something has an upside, you know, of $1 million, that venture probably ought to be recognized more so than if something has an upside of, you know, $5,000. And so I think it's about prioritizing and relying on everybody on your team with a common vision to say, what should we do and who's going to initiate it and what does success look like, and letting people run with those things.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and I know, Jan, you and I have had a conversation in the past about, you know, how do you know, in fact, we were having a conversation about this yesterday with a client of ours about identifying, like, for example, a piece of software and knowing, even getting more specific, identifying a piece of software and knowing, does the software I have already, you know, that I'm already paying for, have the capabilities versus not? And sometimes those are some of the basic things that I think, Jan, as you were alluding to earlier, you said sometimes they don't even realize either the problem that exists or the capabilities that are there to solve the problem. So, I mean, is there any, I'm just curious from connecting the dots between those problems and capabilities, is there anybody, like when you're walking a team through that, is there any nuggets to drive some of that, to help drive maybe assessing some of those specifically, like getting a little bit more granular, I guess is where I'm going?
Nate, I don't know, this is Jan. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I guess when I read the question, I was thinking one of the important things to do is get outside perspective to help identify what your existing capabilities are. And so it could be technology that is free out in the marketplace or technology you're already paying for. We see that a lot. But I often hear, you know, from our clients that they just appreciated having like a fresh set of eyes, because they didn't realize, you know, that they had maybe really talented individuals in their organization that were not in the right seats. And there's just so many capabilities. Again, we're about maximizing resources, and there's so many wasted resources, whether it be people or technology.
Yeah, no, that's good. All right, so if we've identified and assessed some of our capabilities, and whether it's people or time or money or technology, or as John, as you mentioned, the also understanding the potential benefit, you know, to help prioritize. One of the next things that I've seen, at least across when we worked with our clients and even internally in our own organization, is you know, one of the biggest challenge obstacles is that organizations aren't prescriptive enough, and that has come up several times in our client immersion experiences when we've been doing training and guided tours of that. Is that they feel like, yeah, the tool is available, but they're not then prescriptive enough about how they want to solve or handle a problem. Again, this reminds me of Stephen Covey's statement, you know, start with the end in mind. And I'll just open it up to any one of you that if it strikes a chord, you know, what recommendations or suggestions have you found successful in really defining the desired change to the right level of detail, right? Because I think that's a challenge that many organizations face. Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is Jenny. I'll just say top level. I think one of the key things on that, like you said, start with the end in mind, is you have to get employees involved in whatever the change is going to be in the end design before you roll it out and push it out to the company. Too often things are rolled out first, and then they get the employees involved, and they're basically just forced to conform, and that causes a lot of this change and a lot of those issues. Where if you can bring them in beforehand and have them define what is that end result we want in mind, and then work backwards, you'll have a lot more success.
So you're suggesting also kind of in the getting the right people involved stage, or at least as getting those same people involved and making sure that that's kind of as part of the key part of the process, you're actually Correct. Also helping to find the end objective.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Too often we push things from the top down. We go, here's what the company needs, and we push it out, and we never get any of the employees that are going to be the most impacted by it involved. And you don't have the resources usually in larger companies to get everyone involved, but you need to pull out some of them and have them involved in it so that you learn from them, because they're the ones that are going to use it and it's going to be impacted the most by it. And if you have them involved in that kind of design on the change, you'll have more success on what that end game should look like.
Great points. John or Jan, any even nuggets around either being prescriptive or just anything along those lines? Because again, that's the word that kind of keeps resonating with people as far as I feel like they're not getting to that level of detail that really helps drive this. So I don't know if any thoughts around either what is the right level of detail or just what have you found? What have you any stories around people that have been prescriptive and successful in your opinion, in your experience?
So this is Jan. I'm not sure if I'm directly answering the question, but one area where I see a huge gap with companies is that management will, again, say email's an issue, and they'll set up to have technical training on Outlook. And so one of the areas where we see it's really important is that companies really need to think through the workflow and how is the communication pipeline, how is the ball being passed from one person to another, and how exactly should they be using tools like Outlook? And then you go into training. So it's kind of streamlining the workflow and having a consistent best practice approach to using the tool, and then train not just on the bells and whistles in the tool, but train on who's doing what and what bells and whistles are needed in order to effectively manage that part of the pipeline. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no,
I suppose,
so I'd like to, go ahead, John.
Go ahead. Well, I suppose I'm a bit more pragmatic where, like, we have a mission and we know where we need to be each year, each quarter, each month, and we initiate change based around those different KPIs and the things that are going to help us get there. And so I think when we initiate change, it's all based on specific results that we are addressing that need to be fixed and moved, and we change things based on that. So we kind of reverse engineer change. I would never say, oh, we need to do this without understanding how it impacts the entire organization and exactly what needs done to get the result that we need to stay on vision there.
Yeah, I like that. That it's you're driving innovation and creativity by saying, here's the objective we want to hit. Now, how do we have to work together to hit it, and what changes we need to make in order to do that? So I like that. As a follow-up to Jan's, again, I think because I only do that because trying to get a little more prescriptive is so. For instance, when you talk about email, because it's and just honing in on that because you mentioned a specific example, is also email seems to be one of those challenges that every single session that we've run and done from a training or guiding perspective is everyone says they either get too much email or it's time consuming or they don't manage it well. But one of the things you just mentioned is that it's not just about training on how to use Outlook, for example. It's what is the what is the workflow, and have you had to get into, for instance, as new solutions are available, I've seen organizations say something like, or train around, internally we don't use email. That email is only for external communication. So we're going to use other internal tools that we choose, like Microsoft Teams, for example. Is that what you mean, or like can you just go a little deeper onto, like you said, about the workflow? And because I think that's an example that at least people can, I think, relate to, and they might be able to take that little bit deeper dive on that particular issue and relate it to something back operationally specifically.
Yeah, so again, it's all about figuring out what the root issue is and understanding where you want to go. And so in some cases, it could be that defining the workflow and who does what in the workflow and how to use the tool, that could be the solution to solve the problem. In other cases, I love you use that example of they're using other tools for internal communication and only Outlook for external. And again, that's been an evolution of us moving from being individual contributors to working on teams. Most businesses today are abusing email and using it as a project management tool, as a collaboration tool. It is not any of those things. And so it is important that companies are looking and recognizing that the issue with email is not that email and Outlook is horrible. It's that they're trying to do the wrong things within the tool. And so suggesting other tools could be the right solution. Did that answer it?
Yep. Yeah. No, that's yeah, and I think that's where it's just kind of giving that as an example of I'm not trying to say that email is the solution or the problem you should try and solve. It's just that I think people can relate to that kind of issue and realizing that it's using the tool for its intended purpose, and then just making sure that your whole team is on the same page. Not like what John's been saying the whole time, is everyone on your team needs to be on the same page about it. So okay, so we've gone through a few steps here as far as kind of identifying some of the problems we're trying to solve, getting the right folks involved and collaborating and eliciting feedback from the people that are impacted, assessing our capabilities, being prescriptive about the end goal. But now, and I want to go to Jenny, because I think Jenny, you seem to be on this end of the spectrum in particular with regard to, and you even gave like an acronym on it, which I loved, of how do you then, what are some of the tips? And again, I'm going to ask all of you, but I'll start with Jenny. As far as, okay, so now you've got all this stuff defined. Now you need to roll it out. Now you need to get people trained. Like, what are some of the things that you found that have been successful that actually make change and behavior change stick in an organization?
Yeah. So, and I can talk about training all day long, so I'll wrap up with that little piece on training. But, before you ever get to the training it is, again, getting those key people involved, and they need to be leaders, but not necessarily management. So in getting them involved in creating, what that end result is going to be. And just to give you an example, we'll go into companies that are going to install and implement and adopt SharePoint, which is a huge change for an organization. And the best way that we do that is make sure that we do all these planning meetings with some type of a committee, and usually it's someone from each department. And the key with that is having those departments plan how they want to use it and how they want to build it, because each department can have different needs, and really talking through what do you need, and then showing them as well. You need to show them all the options. Here's all the options. What out of this would work best for you? So, because a lot of people, you can say, hey, we can do whatever, and they, what would you like? And it's too general for them. So you need to set some parameters and say, okay, here's options we can do. Which of these would be a benefit for you? And then help them pick and choose, where they want to be, what that end result is, and then from there we can really design the best product for every individual and get something that works for them. But by getting those people involved at the beginning, they become your cheerleaders for the rest of the organization. And that's why I always say include naysayers in that group, ones that are always going to be a struggle, because if you can get them to embrace whatever it is you're rolling out, they're now going to help make sure that change sticks, because they're going to tell everyone else this new thing coming is great. And so that helps everyone else open up and be receptive to when this stuff actually comes out. So that will really help the adoption process. And then as far as training, I get this all the time where a company goes, great, come in and do an hour training once you roll it out and we should be good. Unfortunately, training is not a one and done process, and you can't really solve world peace in an hour. Love to, but it doesn't work that well. So you have to, you're trying to actually change behavior here. So you need constant reinforcement. And, that was the last thing I talked about in that PEER acronym, is you have to constantly reinforce. So even though you've rolled it out and everyone's been trained once, find constant things to change that behavior, as far as having management push people to use the system in ways. For example, if it's put a resource or a document they need or information they need, something in the new system, so they have to constantly be going to find that and interact with it daily in their work, in getting their job done. So that's happening. Find other ways to reinforce continued learning and knowledge on whatever the new system is. So those are key things to make it actually stick and make that change happen.
This is Jan. I'd love to add. Oh, go ahead,
please,
Nate.
yes, sorry. No, please go ahead.
I was gonna add on, Jenny. I love everything you said and totally agree. And with that, a couple thoughts. I see that as well, that companies will do some initial training, and it's like a fire hose of every single bell and whistle they're going to need to know. And I'm trying to explain to them, do it in a more iterative process. Maybe your training at the beginning is how to input data in the system, and then have the trainers come back a month later, and then you learn how to pull data and use the data for reporting. And so I agree, it's more of an iterative process. The other thing I wanted to interject on is I love your R and your peer acronym about reinforce. There's a great statistic that says if you send somebody to training, you will definitely see a 22% bump in productivity. But if you partner training with coaching, you'll see about an 88% bump in productivity. And the reason for that I see is twofold. One is you can really help somebody take maybe what is theory about something they should be doing and apply it to their specific situation. There are some people that can see that and apply it, and I'm surprised how many times I might do a training session and then go to do personal coaching and the person didn't quite get it and know how to use that trick. The second part is there's no question the accountability is pivotal. So within organizations, if you can assign like follow-up and accountability where people need to show they're actually practicing the new habits, it can take certainly 3 to 4 weeks to change your behavior. And the way to do that is by leveraging that trick over and over again till you see the benefits. So I'll just add that on to everything Jenny's recommended.
Excellent. I wanted to pause so I didn't interrupt John if John was going to interject. Any additional comments or tidbits or things that you found successful, John, and either with your clients, because I know that's part of what how you engage, or just internally.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but anytime there's going to be a change, making sure everybody understands how it ties into the vision. I think one thing that maybe hasn't been mentioned is the onboarding, making sure that any new employees are learning and adopting that. They're going to be easier because they're new to the organization, and so you kind of get to that tipping point a little bit faster where, hey, if I've been there and I kind of resist change a little bit, but everybody else is using it, I'm going to be pulled forward by the rest of the organization. And then I totally agree, periodic touch bases, quarterly relationship updates or reviews where we're talking about things and that's tied to their performance. And are they using the tools? Are they getting done? Are they coordinating with the team? Are they a part of the whole movement? And then one other thing is creating best practices and standards or users guides where people can go back to a place that's documented and watch a video or watch a training session or get additional help so that when they're ready to kind of be in there, and that'll be kind of forced by the organization, by peer pressure, not so much by demand, that they've got the tools to be able to quickly and easily do it, and it's not this big mission of discovery.
Yeah, that's great, and yeah, especially the different medium, video or documentation or process maps, those kind of things. So all right, so I'm going to throw a curveball at you all, but you've all mentioned it in some way, shape, or form, as far as getting the reinforcement, or Jan, you mentioned the percentages of kind of adoption and improvement, and John, you were talking about how you have KPIs that you measure, and so you know what you're targeting. So as you're training, what are some of are there any, because some of these are soft skills, I imagine. Some of these are things that aren't necessarily like, I'm going to see an exact metric improvement potentially. Some things you might, but I don't know, are there measurements, anecdotal or otherwise, I guess, that you all look for to kind of know, all right, we've been successful here. We've actually, other than just micromanaging or looking over someone's shoulder and seeing that they're actually doing the process, are there things that you define to help know if you've been successful when you're driving change?
This is Jan. I can interject. I guess in my one-on-one coaching, I always start with what is their personal goal, and then I always circle back to it. And sometimes that can be measurable, like they're increasing their revenue, and sometimes it's, I want to basically get out of work at 5. And so I just circle back, and yeah, quite often it is more their perception. But if they feel like we've achieved their goal, I feel good.
That's good.
All
right. Well, oh, go ahead.
I was saying, I jump in. I work a lot with when we talk about behavioral things. How do we know if it's successful? How do I make it measurable? And one thing you can do is look at, okay, if for example, let's take something like communication. Communication is a very esoteric topic, because what does that really mean, good communication? So I tell, managers when they want to say, okay, I want to make sure communication is better, to define what that is. What is good communication to you? Is it the fact that, people can write emails that are more professional, or is it the fact that, people reach out to each other more often, they don't mind picking up the phone and talking to a coworker? What does that really mean? And once they define that, we try to find ways to make it measurable, so then that they can track that's happening with their employees. For example, if improved communication is the fact that, my employees aren't hesitant to pick up the phone and talk to anyone in the organization, then how do we make that measurable? How many times then a week would that be great that they reached out to people? And so then we start having them track that, have the employee actually say, yeah, I reach out to, 5 new people every week in the organization. And then we see if we can actually make that number go up by whatever change we're doing. So you have to kind of break it down that way to make some of that behavioral measurable in those realms.
So I'm going to say the same thing. There's always a way to get to some sort of a measure, whether it's a feeling, a satisfaction survey, a 360 survey, a number that you can measure. You've got to try and find a way to get to something like that. And some are going to be softer than others. But, if you do a satisfaction survey after somebody talks to a client, or you do a 360 with the team, or you kind of just gauge how people are working, but you always ought to strive in the expectation to find something that you can measure.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think where, managers struggle sometimes if they're trying to implement change. Well, how do you know if the change has been effective? I mean, I think there's pieces that, like you said, John, some of it's just a feeling, and are you connecting? Some of it could be simple measurements, or it could be revenue numbers, like you said, or just better time management. So, excellent. And there's some things that I was kind of expecting, but I definitely got pieces a lot that I wasn't expecting, which is exactly why we want to share perspectives from other people with the experience that all 3 of you have. So before we wrap it up, I want to just hit on 2 things really quick. One is that we have Microsoft immersion, O365 immersion experiences that Mytech executes nearly on a monthly basis. We only have a couple more left at the end of the year, but you can always find them, whether you're watching this now or watching it in the future, at mytech.com/events. And we will always have future events available that you can register for. I also like to do a quick note on our Q4 event that's in October. We're doing one in Colorado, one in Minnesota, where does your technology know your 2019 business plan? We really try and help our clients, to be the translator between the business plan that you have and is your technology really supporting it, is aware of what you're trying to accomplish. So we'll be talking about that. There's a panel discussion that'll be a live in-person event for that, as well as a demonstration on how to kind of walk through that. So those are the couple of events that we have coming up that I would definitely recommend and suggest if those are of interest. But I want to take the last final moment and say thank you to our panelists, Jan, John, and Jenny. And I'll go in that order and say any final comments you'd like to leave with our audience as they sign off, or just maybe one quick tip that you might suggest that they take as they leave us today. I know it's kind of threw a curveball at you, but Jan?
You did. Oh gosh, I don't know. For me, what's pivotal in an organization is having a progressive leadership team, because if everybody below wants to change and they don't want to change, you're going to be stymied. So, however, a board of directors or anybody can influence the decision leaders to have them be more optimistic, progressive, they will keep up with the rate of change that's required.
Awesome. What about you, John? Any last takeaway that you'd like that someone could take back to their team?
Yeah, I just firm believer that if people understand the vision and where the company's going and why the change is happening, the adoption is going to be 10 times better if they understand why it's going on and how they fit into it versus just having something handed to them.
Excellent. Often overlooked tip there for sure. Jenny, final thoughts as we sign off from our audience.
Final thought, and it kind of goes back to supporting what everyone else just said, is you've got to get everyone involved. You know, you need the right management team to push it. Obviously, you need to, you know, also make sure that you are, as John said, explaining the reasons why behind everything to the employees, and then ultimately get your employees involved early on, make them part of the whole process, and then they'll embrace the change that much more.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your time, and looking forward to collaborating with you all in the future as well. So make it a great day, everyone, and look forward to seeing you at future in-person events and future webinars. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.